Welcome back, and hello to you and all the other 1400 odd subscribers on this channel. I don't even know where you all came from, but thank you very much for all your support. I know it's been a while since the last video, but life has a way of getting in the way of life. So it's been a while and I've been dealing with a few health issues and I'm currently out of work, which means I finally have some time to bust out the old PlayStation 2. In the last video we left off with DB and Squeeze not having a graphical environment, and while it's useful as a server, it didn't really quench my thirst for wanting a fully functional system. And I know I've touched on this idea of building a VGA cable for the PlayStation 2 in the past, and I even looked at an official Linux kit VGA adapter, but the chances of affording one of those or finding one is just out of reach for me at this stage. So that means we're going to have to do this the old-fashioned way, like a real nerd would, and build it ourselves. So what is Sync on Green? Sync on Green in a nutshell basically embeds the signals directly into the Green video channel. This eliminates the need for separate sync signal wires, which is quite an efficient way to go about it. This will reduce the cost of having those extra signal wires over thousands or millions of units, and makes a lot of sense financially for any vendor to use this method. Now, who use these screens and why they aren't everywhere is a question I asked myself and the internet. And after a bit of research, it seems that these screens were primarily used on high-end workstations from around the 80s up until about the early 2000s, and of course Sony being Sony, they incorporated this into the PlayStation 2 as they were a key player in the Sync on Green concept. Not many vendors really followed this method aside from the likes of SGI and Sun Systems, who also use this technique in their computers. It was also used by the film industry for monitors and video editing workstations and might still be in use today. Don't know, maybe you guys know. And that kind of explains why you don't see these monitors in widespread consumer markets, being from the professional setting. Now, we're going to need to pull the V-Sync and C-Sync signals from the Green channel by using an LM1881 signal splitter. I actually got a few of these online just in case I botched the job up at a decent price. We're also going to need a component cable, as this already has the sync signals embedded. And then we're going to need one of these VGA breakout boards. This will just make it a little bit easier while I'm trying to figure things out as a proof of concept. I also had one of these spare old Commodore 64 user port cards sitting around that I had used once for a Wi-Fi controller years ago, so we'll take that and make use of that for the components. Searching around for the instructions on how to build this sync splitter was a bit of a mission, as there are different chips and different methods. So here's the basic layout of my PCB schematic design. Yeah, I know it's a bit basic, but here's my take on it. So here's the basics of the LM1881 chip. It's all pretty self-explanatory here, and these are all the components you're going to need and the values. An interesting observation about the component cable here is you can see that these pins are fully populated, and we know that the PS2 VGA cable connects to this exact port, and they even have an S-video version. So we needed to look at the pin out completely, and we can utilize all the pins on here without having to open up the PlayStation 2 to manually solder on the extra cables. Let's take a closer look here. Now, S-video is confirmed, you can see that, and the composite video is there, and we've got our green, blue and red RGBs, and we've also got 5 volts of power. Now the LM1881 requires 5 volts of power, so we're going to power it through this instead of externally. I have seen other plans where people have plugged in USB ports and all sorts of other things, but we're just going to skip that. I mean, we don't want it looking ugly or anything. Here's the schematic layout of my setup with my LM1881 and the VGA breakout board. Now bear in mind, for your RGBs you will need a 220 microfarad capacitor on those signal lines, or else the signal will be very, very dark on your screen. It will work, but it won't look very good. With all this information, we can finally build the first mock-up model and see where that takes us. As a precautionary measure, I wanted to keep the ability to use my component cables just in case this doesn't work. There's definitely a nicer way to do this, like definitely. But I just wanted to get it going first as a proof of concept, so don't laugh too hard at the The workmanship here is definitely not a Nacho Macho quality job. Love his channel, by the way. Looking at the AV port end of things here, I've soldered on the 5 volts positive and ground, so that'll power our LM1881 chip for our sync needs. Moving over to the other side of the chip here, it actually doesn't look too bad, almost respectable. You can see that the main 3 caps here are the inline caps to boost that signal, so it's nice and bright when it comes through. Looking on the other side here, it looks like a bit of a mess here. It's definitely not my proudest moment, but we need to see if this thing works. Now, it's not the prettiest setup. It's kind of a mess. I am very happy with the way this has turned out. It's great. Now we just need to get this thing to boot. And no. Obviously, these are the wrong settings. This is for PAL. As in, like, you know, normal video signal. So that's not going to work. Okay, let's go back to the start. Let's boot the PlayStation 2 up again. Now, you'll notice here that we're getting an input signal out of range. And this is due to the fact that the LM1881 only extracts a C-Sync signal, which is enough for Kloader to actually use, but the PlayStation itself will not display. And we'll look at some other chips that will actually extract and convert to H-Sync and V-Sync to give us a true VGA signal. But for the time being, just as a proof of concept, this does work in Kloader. All you have to do is click the R2 button twice, I think it is, and it'll bring this up. And then all we need to do is set to the current video mode. Basic VESA settings there. We can also change that to 640 and 800 and 1024. All those settings work. Okay, so this is where the real trouble started for this. Yep, let's just put sudo in there. Can't forget sudo. Next we've got to configure our Xorg setup. Debian comes with a basic set of configuration files for a standard Xorg, which will work for your standard composite or component output. And it's trying, nope, complete failure. Now you can see up the top here, it's actually trying to go through all these other video cards, which is not right. So we're going to have to change all that. Now I figured, you know, VESA would probably be the next bet. Otherwise I'll return to the frame buffer, which is probably going to work. But we'll just see what happens here, and I'm just going to have a quick squiz through this. See, yeah, OS did not detect PCI devices, guessing wildly. Oh, you got to love that stuff in the early days of Linux. At least the programmers had a sense of humour. That doesn't really help us though. Sony ships the PS2 Linux PC conversion kit. You know, they got a lot of press for this, saying that it wasn't a PC, but all these peripherals would suggest otherwise, and the fact that it can run Linux suggests otherwise. You can network on it, you can do everything on it. I mean, it is Linux, but it's essentially a computer. That's going to do it for this episode, guys. You're going to have to tune in to see the beautiful, tasty results. That has taken all night to get going. Still loading. That's fucking cool.